Three, two.
Good afternoon. My name is Barry Hudson, Director of Public Information, and I'd like to welcome you to County Executive Marc Elrich's weekly media briefing. Today, Marc is joined by Dr. James Bridgers, who is the Director of our Department of Health and Human Services, and Dr. Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. The County Executives just returned back this week from a trip, and we're glad to have you back, Mr. Executive. I'll hand it over to you.
So thank you. So I am back. The county spent 2 weeks in South Korea and China. A couple of us from the county government and a couple of people from the county's economic development department and a number of private business people who either are Chinese or Korean accompanying us on this trip to South Korea and China. Similar to our previous trips in Taiwan, India, and Vietnam, we received a warm reception and a lot of interest in South Korea and China from businesses and academic institutions on establishing a relationship and building partnerships around economic development. In South Korea, there was serious interest from their bio and life science companies and some of the opportunities here. We were recruiting business prospects in Bio Korea, which is this annual conference they have in Korea, and in separate meetings in the cities of Osong and Daejeon. It was pretty successful. We signed a memorandum of understanding with the CEO of Rapigen, which is a Korean diagnostics company with an office in Montgomery County's Rockville Innovation Center. And the MOU covers Rapigen's pending expansion to lab and more office space in the Germantown Innovation Center. It also covers a commitment to manufacture the diagnostic tests they're working on and getting an FDA, and they're in the process to get FDA approval, having these things manufactured in Germantown as well. I also signed a partnership renewal agreement strengthening cultural and economic ties with the sister city of Daejeon, and the emphasis on expanding economic ties met both sides' objectives. All of us wanted to take the sister city relationship, which has largely been a friendship relationship, and expand it to greater discussion about economic growth and what opportunities the United States could provide to Korean companies and what opportunities American companies might find in Korea. In China, we met with companies in both the bio and manufacturing space. There's an interest in some companies setting up manufacturing here, and I emphasized the proximity of Baltimore and the port and the rail lines that run through it as a real advantage that we have over many other places in the country. That was of special interest to several of the companies that we were talking to. And we spent a lot of time promoting our strengths in the life sciences, but also our transportation assets, because we realized they had value. We're going to do a fuller briefing on what happened over there next week. Judy Costello will join me, probably somebody from the Economic Development Corporation, just to give people a better idea of what kind of opportunities we're looking at. But we do feel that we continue to get interest from companies, both because of, frankly, Montgomery County's diversity in our population, because we're able to bring South Korean and Chinese nationals who live in the United States now and who have companies here and do work here to come over with us and actually talk to their counterparts about what it's like to live in Montgomery County and why it's a good place to locate businesses. So we think that, we continue to play on our strengths. And in the bio world, there's a lot of interest in our incubators in the Institute for Health Computing. And of course, for everybody who wants to get into the market in the United States, the proximity of the FDA to anybody who's locating here. So we think it's gone well, and we continue to feel that we're making progress. And these are important additional opportunities for Montgomery County to take advantage of as we move forward. Yesterday, I was proud to announce that Assistant Chief Mark Yamada is my nominee for Police Chief of MCPD. Over the last 24 hours, I've received positive reactions to this announcement largely, and if confirmed by the County Council, Mark Yamada will make history as the first Asian American and first Japanese American to lead the MCPD. Mark understands the foundation of a successful MCPD and resides in maintaining sorry about that. Uh, he's determined to help maintain and expand the trust that the people we have in the department and with the communities. We know that we have to build stronger relationships in the community. We're actually going to be probably within the next month or so sending forward nomination for new civilian police chief who would work on many of the community issues that have been raised by residents, and hopefully strengthen our department in that way. Mark knows that effective policing requires building strong relations within the community, listening to community's concerns and working together to find solutions. And his leadership style is collaborative and inclusive. That's why I felt comfortable stopping our search for a new police chief without expanding it to a national search. Our police department has been through a lot over the last 5 years, and it's been a time of transformation. And I think we all know that the events with the murder of George Floyd um, accelerated concerns over policing in the United States, and subsequent incidents just brought a brighter spotlight on that. We brought in consultants at the time to help us improve our practices and to work on our training programs. And we were determined to make a good department better. Senior leadership worked through the change process. And while there were some differences of opinion at times, they implemented the steps we were taking to improve the department. Because we've been able to successfully manage the process, I felt there were a number of candidates who could lead this department going forward. And when you look around the country, it's hard to find departments like ours, and police reform has been challenging, if not outright difficult, in many other places. A lot of places have not been able to institute the reforms that we're doing here. I felt an internal candidate who had been part of the work we'd done to get to this point would be a better candidate, rather than hoping that we'd find someone from outside the region who could hit the ground running here, not knowing the community and not knowing the key personnel they'd be working with. And most importantly, not having been part of the process of change that has brought us to where we are today. I felt we had candidates that were well suited to lead the department going forward internally, and they would start with the experience of working in this community. Mark will not only not have to learn about Montgomery County, he has lived here his whole life, and he's not going to start fresh in dealing with an evolving department because he's been involved in the evolution. Nomination goes to the county council for confirmation. They will interview him on June 11th. I'm optimistic that the process will move expeditiously and there will be a smooth transition as Chief Jones' tenure comes to an end. And I want to thank Chief Jones for the work he's done and for helping us manage the transition. We know that was not easy work. I appreciate the fact that he's helped us get to a better place and make it possible for us to talk about leading this department going forward with a firm foundation underneath us. This morning, my Chief Administrative Officer, Rich Madalino, and Assistant Chief Administration Officer, Earl Stoddard, attended the funeral of the Silver Spring firefighter. Yu Lun Wu was better known as William. He'd been a member of Montgomery County's Fire and Rescue Service since graduating from the academy in 2008. William was born in Taiwan, but for many years called Montgomery County home, and friends admired his positive energy, his smile, and his warm welcome. The 54-year-old died earlier this month. He leaves behind the wife, his father, and sister, and my heart goes out to his family, everyone he touched over his career as a public servant for Montgomery County. Earlier today, not much earlier, I guess, County Council finalized the FY25 operating budget and the FY25 to 30 capital improvements budget. I want to thank them for their work, and I appreciate their agreement and support on 99.5% of my recommended budget. This budget adds funds for a number of important initiatives, including expanding our successful drone program in the police department, sustaining and expanding our mobile crisis teams, workforce training at the correctional facility, and supporting the Great Seneca Transit Network and support for tenants. We're also continuing our significant investment in economic development to support our incubators and the BioHub Maryland in Montgomery County. We're also continuing our work to address climate change. And while not all my recommended items were funded, we are making progress. We also recognize the work that our nonprofits do for the county, and the budget includes a 3% inflationary adjustment to the amount that these groups are going to receive from the county. The approved budget includes investments of nearly $364 million for climate change and environmental issues. Although the council made cuts to the recommended budget, we are still committed to a record level of funding, $247 million, that will continue our investment in affordable housing and related social programs. This funding will expand the preservation and production of affordable housing for the most economically burdened residents in the county. And by passing rent stabilization, we have worked hard to keep renters from being priced out of their homes. That work will continue as we work with community partners to help provide more housing options for working families. And this is a big part of the work we've been doing. And we've had some notable projects we've been successful in. I think of the acquisition of the 367 units or 365 units, where we were able to work with our partners in Enterprise to prevent the major rent increase in the complex and ultimately transfer ownership to Enterprise to preserve it as permanent affordable housing. The budget also recognizes the work of those in our nonprofit organization and the workers that support the needs of so many of the residents in our county. The nonprofits do get the 3% inflationary adjustments to the amount they receive from the county. But I will say there were significant cuts made to programs that had requested additional funding because there are real needs in this community that we are addressing. Through all our actions, though, my administration will continue to make every decision through racial equity and social justice. And I think this budget reflects a good effort by our departments to make sure that we're spending money equitably and addressing the range of problems in Montgomery County. As you know, half of our budget goes towards schools, and the schools were funded well above the funding from last year and more than 99% of their requested amount. However, we all know the schools are facing difficult challenges, and we will be working to try to help them meet their needs. My administration has been working to address the need for more mental health and behavioral health support in the schools, on police calls, and throughout the county in different ways. Over the past 2 years, we've been building a plan for a systemic approach to these challenges that involve our departments of health and human services. In this budget, we're expanding mobile health crisis teams, adding dental care to our mobile health clinics to help more people address their needs. We've seen how bringing community partners together to collectively tackle society issues works much better than trying to fix symptoms of the problem as they arise. And also in many cases, particularly with our mobile crisis teams, it's helping take the burden off of police. Police are dealing with a lot of social issues that could really be dealt better with by social workers. And there's not always a need to send a police person in order to deal with an issue involving a homeless person. So some of these changes we're bringing about give us better tools to more appropriately address some of the social issues we're dealing with in the county. I know that many Montgomery County families struggle with childcare issues. Childcare is probably one of the major reasons that women have been slow to return to the workforce because of the high costs associated with it. In the improved budget, we'll be investing more money in organizations like the Children's Opportunity Alliance. It will focus on building a high quality and equitable early childhood system in the county. More families need to know about our early care and education opportunities that are already available to families and children who are younger than 5. Many programs on the local and state level are now working to try to ease the burden of single parenthood and historically and the issues economically with our historically disenfranchised communities. In the aftermath of the global pandemic, the needs of our residents unfortunately remain, particularly in the area of food insecurity. As a result, we've created an Office of Food Systems Resilience, and the council has adopted a policy of no child will go hungry. This office is focused on ending childhood hunger, and we're working to bring together the many efforts to feed families in need across the county and to use our resources to create efficiencies and innovative solutions to reducing food waste. Unfortunately, the cuts to my original budget proposal jeopardized the plans we developed to better address this very serious issue. The cut was about $3.5 million for food security programming. The council made similar cuts last year, actually larger, and we had to come back to them with a supplemental halfway through the year because food providers were running out of funding. This will likely happen again this year because the people who provide food for the community are saying there's no real reduction in the number of people who are coming in asking for food assistance. This problem was pretty much largely masked pre-COVID. COVID kind of brought it front and center, and I think all of us recognize that the magnitude of the problem was greater than we'd assumed in the past. I'd like to remind everyone that since I've been county executive, advisors for the county council have projected that every year my budget will have a deficit in the following year. Every year. I think the COVID budget, they said I was going to have a $450 million budget. I think this year deficit. I think this year I was supposed to have a $145 million deficit. If they were correct and we truly had a structural deficit, we would not have been able to build our reserves to 15% or $959.6 million in FY24. Just as a reminder to people with short memories, when I came into office, the county's target was 10% reserves, and we had never achieved 10% reserves. We hit 10% in my second year. Reserves have grown to 15% this year. And had we actually had a structural deficit, it would have required the county either to reduce programs mid-year, to lay off people, or to raise taxes. And we haven't had to do any of those things. We haven't had to draw down on our reserves. The normal way that you deal with deficits is you pull out of your reserves. The county didn't have to do any of that either. So we're at 15% reserves. So this talk about a structural deficit driving some dire need to make cuts is just not true. There is no structural deficit. And if there were a deficit, since we're not allowed to run a budget that has a deficit, we would have to make the necessary cuts that you have to make when you get a deficit. When I was on the county council, we had to make mid-year cuts all the time. That was not unusual. And when I came into office in my first term, on the second day, I was presented with a deficit of over $40 million. And by time it got to, I think, February that year, our deficit was $90 million. This is the budget I inherited when I first walked into office. We had to deal with that. We had to make hard cuts, but the county didn't fold up its tents and go away. If you have a deficit, then you deal with it. There's no way you have a structural deficit in a county that has a no deficit policy. So we think it's not right to argue that there's a structural deficit, and the numbers certainly don't back it up. You may have theoretical numbers on a piece of paper. The numbers I care about is how much money do we have in the bank and what's the situation with our reserves. And I assure you, our reserves are healthy. Our numbers are based on data, robust community input, and what people who are doing the work say they need to serve residents. That's why our budget should be focused on. That's what it should be focused on. Because of the process used by the county council, and this is, I think, one of the things I find most distressing. After all of our budget proposals going through committees, and every one of them, except for maybe one or two, got 3-0 votes in committees for approval. One of them had a 2-1 vote for approval. The council put all of these additional things onto a list and then proceeded to cut programs. And they didn't do it in public. Nobody knows how council members voted. In fact, council members didn't actually vote. They took this list. They had private meetings. Council members couldn't be in those meetings. If they were, that would have been a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So council members' staff looked at the list and made cuts to the budget. And so what's in the final budget from the council is different than what was approved in committee. And the public has no idea who voted for which proposals, who voted to cut, for example, the firefighter camp that was aimed at girls because we were trying to increase recruiting in the fire department among women. Nor are they going to know which council members didn't support our community work to help grow solar energy in the county. There's a whole bunch of things on that list, and nobody knows how the county voted. There was no public discussion. County departments weren't even involved in the discussion. They had no opportunity to explain to the staff members, who, by the way, were elected by nobody, about why they should or should not be making the cuts they were proposing. So it's a frustrating process. I'm hoping that whoever is the council president in the next term does not repeat this again. It deprives the public of the information they need. Every voter has a right to know how council members vote. Just like everybody voter has a right to know what I put in my budget and what I didn't put in my budget. I don't get to hide behind a group of people, and nobody should be able to make these decisions out of plain sight. We need a different approach to the budget that values transparency and discussion rather than cuts to a budget that were made at the 11th hour and our residents are left wondering what happened between the committee session and the cuts. Um, I pointed out that we could use money from OPEB to address the gap that exists, which is tied to an increase in healthcare costs. We know the schools, um, their gap increased after their initial budget decisions because they found that they had major shortages in last year's, or actually the current year's medical costs. And then they were projecting a similar increase in medical costs that were not accounted for in their planning in the year that we're budgeting for. So a total of about $44 million. We proposed using the OPEB money. OPEB is money that goes into an employee's retirement trust. It actually doesn't pay out any benefits, unlike a pension fund. When people retire, they draw money from the pension fund. OPEB is not a fund anybody draws money for. The purpose of OPEB is for some time in the future, I don't know, 15 or 20 years from now, there are so many billions of dollars in that fund that the interest on the fund will generate enough money to pay for the annual cost of retirement benefits. Right now, for those of you who are taxpayers, you're paying for the annual cost of retiree benefits out of the current budget. Your taxes are paying for the current costs. Then your taxes are paying to build up this fund for some future use. And at no point until the fund is actually generating enough revenue to cover all costs will there be any benefit. And so we're putting away money for some future purpose, which isn't necessary. If it became in year 20 that you could actually fund OPEB costs off of the interest on this fund, it still means in year 19, the costs in that fund would be paid for by the county residents. It's not saving anybody anything. It does not put in jeopardy the healthcare benefits for any of our county employees. It, I think, was thought of as a good idea when it was done, but it's become a real albatross around the neck of the county. In FY24, $62 million was budgeted to go to Montgomery County Public Schools OPEB account. $27 million was not put into OPEB, and this has been done for about a decade, and is not put into OPEB by the council. $10 million was not put into OPEB based on a council decision on May 10th to use this money to pay for unexpectedly high healthcare costs. In FY25, $57 million was budgeted to go into MCPS OPEB. $27 million will not be put in, again, as has been done for a decade. And our suggestion was to fund the deficit in the school system spending by taking another $22 million out of OPEB. The council would not have any trouble of funding their full budget. We would have not needed the tax increase. We would have not needed to cut other services that we need in order to fund the school budget. It was a win-win for everybody. And it's a practice that the council has used. When I was on the council, we routinely went into OPEB. Anytime we had a budget shortage and we couldn't fund things, the staff at the council level would point out that we had OPEB money we could pull out. So we weren't proposing anything unusual. We suggested that they use the OPEB money. It didn't need to be a budget item because the money was already in the school budget. So all we had to say is don't use it for the OPEB payment, use this money to meet the current costs. And in my mind, this is a much easier way to deal with this problem, much easier than the way the council went about making their decisions. I want to address another issue around the school statement. I think I saw Jawanda blame me for the deficit in the school funding. I want to point out, first of all, I polled council members prior to submitting the budget, trying to be cooperative, so I didn't send over a number that they weren't going to accept. And I asked them what range they would approve of going forward to increase the school budget over last year. The number I got from council members ranged between $50 million and $100 million, which was not enough to fund the school budget. I funded above that amount. But this is what the council told me they wanted to do, and that was not acceptable. I asked them if they'd support a penny and a half tax increase to replace the one-time funding that no longer exists. Last year, when the council was doing the school budget, instead of funding the full taxes I had asked for, or even 7 cents of what I had asked for, they didn't fund it enough. And they told the school system to spend $33 million out of one-time federal money that no longer exists. And the council knew it wasn't going to be there to fund the school budget. So this year, the school budget comes in with all those positions in the budget and no funding in the budget to support those positions. So this problem started with the decision the council made last year not to raise taxes sufficient to fund the ongoing cost of the system. And it's just been made worse this year. Um, we've got to be more realistic. The council is going to get faced with additional demands because of the blueprint every year. Schools are not going to get cheaper. They're going to get more expensive. On top of that, we're now spending 80% of what we used to spend on schools per pupil spending. That's not good. I think we need to take a more realistic approach to budgeting for the schools, and I think budgeting in general. Again, my budget had it been enacted the way we had hoped it'd be enacted, could have preserved the services that were cut, could have funded the school system, and avoided what we're going through in this last minute here. And it's kind of frustrating. We had the ability to make this work. It didn't need to be cuts, rifts, or cuts to other county programs. So I'll open it up to questions and like to give my staff first an opportunity for any updates they want to share.
Thank you, Mr. Executive. Dr. Stoddard or Dr. Bridgers, any information to share?
Good afternoon, Director Hudson. Just to add, don't know if we got to the health report or you want me to pause or just provide the update now.
Go ahead and do it now so we can and we'll go back to questions.
Okay. Okay, very well. So just a quick update from our public health team who couldn't join us this afternoon. We continue to monitor the KP.2 variant that has taken over for the JN variants that's been in the community for the past 5 or 6 months. We don't see a significant increase in the county. However, nationwide, it is a 25% increase with this variant. We are all reminded to remember those public health practices, to stay up to date on vaccinations, wash your hands repeatedly. If you're sick, contact your primary care physician, stay in a place that's safe so that you don't infect others. We have our RSV, influenza, and COVID numbers are down. However, we still highly encourage folks to deploy those public health practices. That's the update from our public health team. Subject to any questions. Thank you, Mr. Hudson.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgers. Reporters, if you have any questions for County Executive, Dr. Stoddard, or Dr. Bridgers, now is your opportunity to do so. Just raise your hand and we will recognize you accordingly. Any questions? Going once.
Hi, it's Lily with Fox 5. I have my hand raised on that
Okay,
one.
I didn't see it. I apologize. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I didn't want to overstep anyone. Hey, thank you so much for holding this media availability. For the county executive, we just spoke with the council president, Mr. Friedson, essentially asking him about the budget and the steps that they took to reach this decision. He made a comment saying that it was quote unquote hard to take serious criticism from you because you had, according to him, but you had funded this education budget at a lower level than the county council did. Was wondering if you could respond to that comment from Mr. Friedson.
So first thing, as I said before, when I talked to council members about where they wanted this budget to be, they were all lower than where I wound up submitting. That's a starting point. Second, we didn't need to. We did not need to put additional money in the school budget if they had been allowed to use their $44 million of OPEB money. So I didn't add $44 million to the budget because the OPEB money was already in their budget, and I didn't need to add any additional money. So if the council had done what we suggested, which was use the OPEB money to fill this gap, there wouldn't be any additional money going into the school system, and it would have been the money they already had. We tried explaining this to the council. They continue. They have strange ideas about the OPEB fund, and people continue to talk about, well, this is future retirees' money, which it actually isn't. It's a bit. I think it's a bit disingenuous. I guess that's all. I mean, if you understand my point about this money already being in their budget.
Yeah, basically, when he and I talked, he basically said that was never brought up as a suggestion before now, is essentially what he told us.
I've raised this with council members. I raised it before the council. We've raised this actually for a couple of years about being able to use OPEB funds more liberally when we need to. When I was a council member, we used OPEB funds. This council has approved OPEB funding for non-OPEB uses for at least a decade now. Not this council, but most recent councils. This one included. So we weren't suggesting anything strange, and it didn't require us to do anything other than to agree we would move the money over there, which is what we suggested. When we started putting the budget together, we didn't start with the information about the magnitude of the school system's funding problem for their health programs. This came as something we weren't originally dealing with. We were dealing with the request from this that came over, which was mostly about operating funding. So we were a little bit surprised. We were not very happy, but we also felt right away that we should be using this money, and it's a pretty simple thing to do since Andrew and the others have been doing this anyway. I don't know why they act like this is a surprising solution.
My last question on the budget. This morning, Council Member Glass made a comment regarding the apparent risk of teachers being cut next year. He had mentioned in his words that this is kind of blindsided from the council's perspective. Do you think that the council should have known about this sooner? It is my understanding that the board is currently in a closed session.
Look, they were told this last year. The school system they'd spent $33 million hiring people last year. Everybody knew, unless they're pretending they didn't know, that those positions were long-term positions. They weren't one-year positions, they were permanent positions. So they created a budget last year that was funded on what is essentially non-existent money this year. They knew that money wasn't there. That's why I raised the issue. Are you willing to raise the additional taxes to cover what you didn't fund last year? Could we get this last penny and a half? I couldn't get a council member who was willing to go out on a limb and support it. I won't say that nobody was sympathetic, but there was also nobody who's willing to say, yeah, we ought to do this. We need to make this budget whole. So this is totally predictable. And he knew darn well that those positions had to be funding, and there's no place in the budget to fund them from. There's no place in the school budget to fund them from. And if you're not going to raise taxes, it gets really difficult to fund $33 million that's sitting there without going into cutting things. And the school system is going to be put in a position where they're likely going to have to make these cuts. Now, I will point out the council on May 10th transferred $10 million out of the OPEB trust to fund current year costs. So their outrage over what I'm suggesting is just stunningly hypocritical. I mean, it's only, 2 weeks ago that they yanked $10 million out of OPEB for costs that they were meeting. So they all know this is a tool. This is just, political again. It's not about, could you have solved this problem? It's like, let's pretend like I created a crisis for them. But it's just not accurate. And I talked with him about this. I guarantee you, he was one of the council members who said he would not support funding over $100 million. So,
thank you.
It's kind of like a disincentive. If you're going to talk to council members to try to get a temperature to figure out where they want something to come out, particularly as crucial as this, And then after it comes out, they suddenly decide they want to do more. I appreciate they want to do more. I wish they just told me in the first place. I would have sent them a budget with more.
Yes, Judith. Go ahead, Judith.
Oh, thank you. And I'm terribly sorry for asking this question. I was having sound problems a little bit ago. But Mr. County Executive, did you say that it would be around June 11th that the County Council would take up the issue of Assistant Chief Yamada?
Um, I don't know their date for when they take it up. I know we sent it over to them officially today. They've got a week to digest it. Earl, what do you know what the timeline?
Yeah, so in Councilmember Fried's or Council President Fried's statement yesterday on the nomination, he stated their intent was to do the interview on June 11th. So
Okay.
June 11th will be the interview, and the votes typically occur 1 week after the interview. So we expect the nomination vote and confirmation on June 18th.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Okay, any other questions? Any other questions? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Mr. County Executive, any closing remarks you want to provide?
No, I think I'm good. We'll have more news. We'll have more news next week. New appointee will announce next week. New things, exciting things coming.
All righty. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Don't forget Memorial Day on Monday, and make sure you recognize those individuals who sacrificed for our country. And if you're looking for things to do this weekend, following in our CAO's footsteps on this, go to the Visit MoCo app and see some of the exciting things going on in Montgomery County. With that, thank you very much for joining the County Executive's weekly briefing. And as he said, we will see you again next week.